So at this stage, one cannot help but ask a question: if evidence-based medicine is not driving HPV vaccine policy, what is? And this article, published in 2012 in the American Journal of Public Health, reveals how Merck promoted school entry mandate legislation by serving as information resource, lobbying legislators, even drafting legislation and mobilizing female legislator and physician organizations who advocated for the introduction of mandatory HPV vaccination laws. And commenting on Merck's lobbying efforts to make HPV vaccination mandatory, this article published in American Journal of Bioethics notes that Justice Pizza bearing cheerleader drug reps are poor substitute for medical education, so is pharmaceutical company lobbying a poor substitute for well-reasoned health policy making. One of the most highly regarded scientific journals, Nature, was also critical of Merck's lobbying activities and noted that ultimately Merck cracked under the pressure of public disapproval and announced the cessation of all efforts to lobby the US state laws requiring mandatory HPV vaccination. Now, history, however, shows that Merck did not stick with this decision. And here you have Merck's official webpage on corporate political advocacy contributions, from which you can find out that they are permitted by law in the US, Canada, and Australia to financially support their favored political candidates in electoral campaigns. At least to their credit, Merck is more transparent than the Croatian League Against Cancer, the main organization promoting mandatory HPV vaccine laws in Croatia, as they, in fact, did not disclose Merck's funding over the last several years.
But I disclosed this on my profile, and there you can find it. There is a link and showing how much they receive in the last, from 2017 till 2024, okay? And also, I have to say, just for the 2023 and 4, they gave 2.5 million in 24 and 3.5 million for research. But that money went to scientists and doctors. And my logical question, I'm not the doctor, but my question is, how is it possible that somebody who is receiving money from producer can be objective about risk or about efficacy of this product? I think they are biased, and we can now see that they are really biased in researchers, but even with the claims that it's safe and efficacy.
Well, I never look first at how much money someone receives and from whom. I will never say, well, this was paid for by Merck, therefore it must be false. But when you look at the research and you see the flaws, and then you also look at the funding, well, things add up.
It's not illegal,
no.
But we need to see that there is a conflict of interest.
And so here, again, from the Merck's webpage on political advocacy contributions, you can find exactly whom they supported and how much. So, for example, in the 2024 report, which is about 32 pages long, you can find that they supported candidates from both ends of the spectrum, Democrat and Republican, and they do that. And the total amount of political advocacy contributions for 2024 was almost $1 million US. We also find that as in 2025, so also in 2023 and 2021, Merck supported Cecilia Aguirre-Curry, a Democrat candidate for the California State Assembly. Now, this same Mrs. Cecilia Aguirre-Curry introduced the bill AB 659, which I already mentioned, the so-called Cancer Prevention Act bill, which called for mandatory HPV vaccination of all students wishing to attend 8th grade level schools in California, whether public or private. And the justification for the bill was, and I quote, "The HPV vaccine is safe and is most effective way to protect Californians against cervical cancer, end quote. I am not even going to call that misinformation. This is an outright falsehood. However, I'm not saying by this that Mrs. Curry deliberately made a false statement, but that is nonetheless a completely false statement. I would also like to note that the bill did not pass even in authoritarian California. Now here we have another article describing how Merck provided educational grants to professional medical associations dealing with adolescent and women's health and oncology in order to promote widespread HPV vaccine use. And this was shortly after Gardasil vaccine was approved by the FDA in 2006. Now, this is Merck's webpage on their grants to medical, scientific, and patients organizations from which you can further follow their money trail. And Merck's motivation to heavily promote Gardasil use apparently boils down to simple math. The company lost quite a lot of money after their drug Vioxx has been taken off the market because of huge safety issues. And according to some estimates, Gardasil had a potential to make up for this financial loss. And for this reason, you had at times these types of cartoons circulating in the media making the point that Merck needed this financial shot in the arm from Gardasil to offset the liability caused by Vioxx. And in fact, some have made a joke that HPV stood for help pay for Vioxx. And here is another article in the news from that time, CNN News, saying that the Gardasil could help Merck get to its pre-Vioxx scandal money-making levels. And concerns over efficacy and safety of Merck's other drugs likewise apparently made the company heavily dependent on its Gardasil promotion campaign. And in that context, early in 2008, Merck sought to expand Gardasil use in women over 19 years of age. And according to Merck, these women represented a tremendous opportunity. And Merck's senior vice president of vaccines stated that, and I quote, "We have a number of programs to get after these women." Now, what would that expression "get after" mean? Well, an excerpt from Merck's global commercialization team meeting minutes may give us an idea. And this is one of the documents cited in my expert witness report in the Gardasil litigation against Merck in the US. And here, Merck's global commercialization team provided a South American sales update for Gardasil, stating, among other things, that, and again I quote, "Puerto Rico has recommended vaccination of 12 to 18-year-olds. Each cohort is valued at $4 million, end quote. So apparently, Merck views your children in terms of money value they can bring to Merck. So if you cannot trust Merck and the politicians, surely you can trust the regulatory agencies, right? Well, actually, no. They apparently are partners in crime. And this brings us to the next section of this talk, what we should have learned from the Vioxx scandals and really many other scandals like it. And one of the lessons that should have been learned, but apparently wasn't, is that the US FDA is incapable of protecting US and the rest of the world that follows their advice against another Vioxx scandal. Now, Vioxx was deemed to be one of the single greatest drug safety catastrophe in the history of the US. And this was a charge made by Dr. David Graham, who was actually in the FDA's Office of Drug and Safety. And he stated that Vioxx is estimated to have caused between 88 to 139,000 Americans to have heart attacks and strokes. And so here you have it, Merck's prior credentials in drug development, Vioxx, and over 100,000 of heart attacks and strokes. And now they want you to trust them when they tell you that Gardasil is safe and effective. And note that both Merck and the FDA were both guilty of obfuscating the cardiovascular risks of Vioxx. And because of that, Senator Grassley stated that the FDA had lost its way when it comes to making sure that drugs are safe, because apparently its relationships with the drug companies were too cozy. Now, another interesting fact is that in 2006, when Gardasil did gain the FDA approval, the acting FDA commissioner requested that the science board, which is an advisory board to the commissioner, form a subcommittee to assess the quality of the work of the FDA. And the conclusions of their assessment were published in a report that is no longer available online, but I do have it. And I published the conclusion in 2012 in this paper. And so the main three conclusions were from the review, from the FDA own review, is that the agency suffers from serious scientific deficiencies and is not positioned to meet current or emerging regulatory responsibilities. Next, that the FDA inability to keep up with scientific advances means that American lives are at risk. And next, the world looks to the FDA as a leader, but not only can the agency not lead, it cannot even keep up with the advances in science. And now it follows that a defective FDA means also that lives outside of US are at risk, and the Vioxx scandal proves that point as well, because deaths from Vioxx were certainly not restricted to the US. Now, some other not very flattering facts about the FDA. It turns out that 2 of the members of the advisory committee FDA that approved Gardasil for use were Merck's former employees, and yet the FDA granted to both of them waivers, finding them free of any conflicts of interest. Now, if you think the European Medicines Agency is any better when it comes to conflicts of interest, well, I'm sorry to disappoint. This is not the case, since about 80% of the EMEA's funding comes from the drug industry. And next, we come to the revolving door phenomenon, and it refers to the fact that many federal employees from agencies like the FDA eventually go on to work for the big pharma. And it happens the other way around too, where former drug industry employees moved into federal jobs that handle healthcare policies. And here we have a very relevant example where the former US CDC director Julie Gerberding subsequently became a president of Merck's vaccine division, a position which gained her over $100 million in wealth based on stocks, in addition to her high salary. And you can read more about that story in Peter Goetsch's most recent book, How Merck and Drug Regulators Hid Serious Harms on the HPV Vaccines. And this book is available from Amazon, and it gives a lot of information on the Gardasil vaccine lawsuit in which both Peter and I were involved as expert witnesses.